And so if you do not pick a master, you will thrust one upon yourself, because that's the way that we were built. And like I said before, mastery only comes from masters. You want to be good at anything, you've got to pick a master.
Hello, welcome again to another episode in the Let People Prosper Show. My name is Dr. Vance Ginn. I hope you're having a prosperous day. Well, today I'm delighted to bring on someone who just wrote a book and has recently published this book and has been talking so much about what's going on and how to build a life of meaning, which I know all of you want to hear more about. And it's none other than Rick Walker. Rick, welcome to the Let People Prosper Show.
Vance, thanks so much for hosting me.
Yeah, it's really a pleasure to have you on. I'm looking forward to talking about your new book. Before we get into all that, though, let me go ahead and give the bio for the audience, and then we'll jump right into it. So Rick Walker is the author of the book that just came out on Saturday, 9 Steps to Build a Life of Meaning, How to Unlock Your Mind, Happiness, Power, and Your Enemy's Demise. Sounds good, right? I know you want to read it. Rick is a renowned leader across multiple domains. As founder CEO, he built a 400-employee company, scaled a 2,000-plus team member nonprofit into 53 countries as chairman, and recruited $5 billion in capital investments to his hometown, generating 5,000 new jobs simultaneously. Amazing. Rick currently works at a private equity firm he founded with 11 wealthy families and is the author of this book that I just talked about on seeing through the world. He lives in Texas and the Houston area with his wife of 21 years and 3 mostly teenage daughters. Sports, ballet lessons, and secret milkshakes milkshake runs, make sure I get that right, consume his free time. And his 3:30 a.m. wake-up call helps to fit everything in. We'll have to get into some of that, Rick. But before I get into our discussion here, let me go and ask you the first question I do all the guests. Why do you do what you do every day?
Well, so from the book perspective, I see this missing generation, 25 to 45, where there's a great deal of men that are searching for meaning. They've never had a positive vision of something they want, but they also They might have a negative vision of what they don't want. They don't want the poverty. They don't want the pain. They don't want the discomfort. And so avoiding discomfort, as you and I know, it always leads you down the road where you don't want to end up in the end. And so I wrote a book based on teaching these men how to rip away the comfort, enslaving their potential. They were always promised the potential. They were always promised these great jobs, these great earning capacity. They're always promised their dreams. They were always promised love. But in the end, some of these men, they're now in their 30s and even 40s, they've never found any of that. And so they're they feel very disenfranchised. They feel very much despondent, hopeless. And so this is an effort to speak hope into that generation, which we very much need from a birth rate perspective, but also from an economic productivity perspective to step up. And this is my attempt, not from the position of an academic or a pontificator, but from the position of a doer.
Yeah, no, I love it. And your background kind of gives you insights, right, on what works, what doesn't. And I'm sure that some of this has been some success and failure. And too often it seems like, Rick, that we lose sight of how you can actually have some success because you learn from that process. Is that something else that you find in your research or in your work in this book?
Yeah. So life is nothing but a string of failures with the occasional moment of perfection.
Yeah.
That's what I found.
Nice.
You fail a lot the more that you try. And as you speed up the iteration and you fixate on the feedback that's necessary and you create and indemnify that feedback loop over time, you're able to learn at a more rapid rate. And so, for instance, whenever I pivot from the world of business to the world of nonprofit to the world of trying to get a book out, for instance, there are some skills that you can learn. You could take from one genre, one domain to the other. And the only reason why you're able to know that is you're able to set up these little tests, these little tiny experiments in a way that you're able to learn very, very rapidly. And so what we want to do is we want to increase the iterations, increase the quality of the feedback, and to increase your pain tolerance in the end, your tolerance for these awkward moments.
Excellent. Throughout your career, and you've done these different things in large companies and many employees and everything else, what has been some of your insight during that time that helped you to learn more about what you wrote about in the book, but also how it affected you throughout that period?
Well, the idea that we are men who are, you know, error free, where this pride really builds up this facade. We see people online that look great. They're driving great cars. They're living these wonderful lives, but we never really see the bad stuff. And so that sort of gets ingrained over time. And what I learned is it really doesn't matter. In fact, I over the last 25 years of doing these different things, operating and scaling into 50 countries with one of the nonprofits and scaling these businesses to hundreds of employees, and even doing some work in the economic development space, I found that I was able to interact with a number of very high quality, kind of world class caliber competency individuals. And the lessons that I took from that, paired with about 1,000 books that I've read over the last 25 years, I try to pour it all into one book. And some of those principles had to do with the idea of three things. And that if you get these three things in your life in order, everything else will take care of them. The first thing is how you handle silence. It takes a strong man to be alone by himself. In fact, a lot of the great philosophers would say that silence is the most fearful place for a man to be, because you never know who'll show up.
Yeah.
Either your real mind or someone, even someone coming from outside the supernatural world to invade. Those are the two great fears. But the second thing that it takes to sort of build a life of relevance is your books. You've got to mind your books. I like to say that the older the sage, the quicker the solution. Oftentimes we're reading the newer materials, the newer economists, when we really should be going back to von Mises. We're reading the newer poetry and the newer plays when we should really be going back to Shakespeare. We're reading Shakespeare when we really should be going back to the Jewish scriptures, which was the source material for Shakespeare. We want to go back as far as possible to the source materials and not rely on the more modernity-laced type of perspectives. And so that's number two, books. So you have silence in books. And the third thing you've got to get together in your life, this is what I found from all these books and all these great conversations I've had the blessing to be able to be a part of, is you must get your dinner table in order. If you can get your dinner table in order, where you're among friends and among family that you're committed to, you're honest with each other, you're able to call forth greatness out of each other, then you begin to have a real life. And the more you can get these three things, the silence, the books, and the dinner table clicking, the more relevance, the more meaning you can build in your life over time. So if I was to simplify all of those things I've learned over the last 25 years, that would be one of the key things. If you can get these three things in life in order, you're going to have more than everything.
Wow. Yeah. That makes a lot of sense. And I want to dig into that too, as we go through this conversation. Do you find that these have also been helpful in your family life with the three girls and everything else? I mean, because sometimes, like for me, being an entrepreneur and starting my own business with this Ginn economic consulting and the podcast, Let People Prosper, I mean, there's some difficulty of balancing all these things at one time. And so as you were saying each one of those three things, it reminded me of the kind of the difficulty that can be sometimes because of all the demands that we have on us and everything else, along with what's happening, with our kids and all the different things that they're doing along the way, and our wives and everything else. I mean, there's so many different parts of this. Do you see that struggle with a lot of folks who are entrepreneurs?
Absolutely. And I think it often takes the form of things where people are building their network or having their free time. Things like golf, things like going to the bars with your buddies after work, things like hunting, going to the lease, 10 weekends out of the year or 20 weekends out of the year. It's those sorts of little things that begin to encroach on that third thing, the dinner table, and it really begins to have a major impact on your life. If we can figure out a way where we can do the necessary things to do these extra sort of plus things, especially those of us that are in the entrepreneurial space, we can't get our work done in 8 hours a day. In fact, I like to say that if you're not working 16 hours a day, you're not even trying. And so if you can do the things that are extra during times of the day where your kids or your wife, they don't know that you're not there, i.e. early in the morning or late at night, then you can begin to make some progress and push ahead without sacrificing the home, right? The only people that really count in your life are the people that are come to your funeral.
Yeah.
I mean, and why are we sacrificing the people that are going to come for a funeral for these networking events?
Yeah.
These people that are never going to send us any business, that are never going to do anything for us, and we're never really going to be very additive to their life. It just doesn't make a lot of sense. And so I found in the long run, it's what you don't do that's more important than what you do.
Wow. Now that's powerful. It reminded me as an economist, right, is thinking about the opportunity cost, right? Well, what are you giving up for every one of those decisions that you make? And I've talked about this a lot on the show about how, man or humans are purposeful people, or purposeful in our actions. We're rational in a lot of in many ways. We may not always make the best decisions, but we learn from that throughout this process. And so all these things fit together nicely with what your book is talking about and the work that you've been doing for so long. I wonder what helps. What other things are kind of your background for your worldview? Christianity, other types of religions, or you said the Austrian School of Economics. Like, what are some of the building blocks, if you will, of your background and your worldview that you have today?
Well, so I've tried to investigate the various religions, the various philosophies, obviously some different economic systems. I would say probably half of my reading over the years has been business strategy, sort of strategy skills related, because at my very essence in the commercial real estate private equity business, I'm a negotiator. I'm always negotiating the purchase or the disposition of something, or negotiating an investment equity interest either on my behalf or to try to accrue that interest. And so it's a lot of negotiations. And so understanding people is very, very important. So therefore, understanding the Bhagavad Gita, for instance, that comes in very, very handy oftentimes. Understanding the Tao Te Ching, which I read just this morning, is very, very important. We have to understand how our how humanity actually operates. And if we don't understand that, we're going to be at a major disadvantage. Case in point, some of my business partners come from India, and they're some of the most successful business people in the world. They've got businesses that are all over the world, very, very successful. Now, me, in my cockiness, I've maybe read 50 books on negotiations. I've been negotiating my whole career. I've been fairly successful. And I come into a negotiation with one of them, and I don't realize about the disadvantage that I have. I don't realize that these guys have been studying, and their whole families have been in like professional traders, professional negotiators for 1,000 years. Like it's literally in their DNA that they're a superior negotiator than I am. But I never get that perspective. I never would get that perspective unless I realize, like, this is who these people are. And some of them are some of my very closest friends. And so we got to study broadly as well. This is why, going into, some poetry, going into the world religions, going into history is very important. Even understanding music is very, very important to understand. When you listen to Mahler 5, when you hear that lovely trumpet at the beginning, we understand that a funeral and also a call to arms are sometimes the same thing. And so being able to relate to people, right? This is what the great School of Austrian Economics told us, is that there's incentives, but the incentives are always tied to human action, and the human actions requires participation.
Yeah.
If we can't participate with anyone, if we can't play games with people, like what are we doing as business people?
Exactly right. No, that's a great point. Rick, whenever you were talking about those things, I was also reminded of kind of the idea of looking at what's happening in the meaning of people's lives. Why are they doing what they're doing? And you mentioned earlier about men, and this is a lot of what the book is geared towards. Why do you think so many men are kind of giving up with the workforce and deciding, not to work or not to be the head of the household, those sort of things? And I mean, there's different dynamics that go into play with that. But I wonder what your thoughts and from the book and elsewhere really give you insight on why was this section of the age group for men, why was that the big target here for the book?
Yeah. So a little bit of perspective. I'm 46. Yeah. This book is geared towards men that are 25 to 45. And so I'm really 1 year removed from that, maybe 6 months removed from that. Yeah. And so I've got a little bit of insight, but I also have some recency bias as well, because I was one of those six months ago.
Yeah.
And so when I look at that that subset of men. This is not all men, but this is a great majority of the men that are in this meaning crisis. They've given up. I've talked about the potentiality that they were promised when they were younger. Their professors in college told them that if you get this MBA, you're going to come out making $250,000 a year. They come out, they're only seeing offers for $1.15.
Yeah.
And they're ready to run the companies, and they don't realize they don't have the maturity to do that. And so they get out and they're frustrated by that, and frustration after frustration builds, and all of a sudden there's a protective guard that's put up that begins to look like indifference, that begins to look like they really don't care. It begins to look like, to the really smart ones, the ones that are highly educated, that they have this great grand thing that they're going to be doing in the place, but no one has recognized their greatness yet. And what that begins to look like, Vance, is that they live on their potential, and their potential never becomes concrete. And so when they look back in their mid-30s and their late 30s, they realize all that I have is potential. And that potential is probably never going to come to fruition unless I find fame, the right person discovers me, or the right person pays me what I'm worth. And it becomes to be an envious or I don't want to say jealous, because that gives the same vibe, but a perspective where they're smarter than everybody else. And they live with this seething hatred of the truly competent. And whenever you hate the competent, you become in a position, a type of person that can never learn from the competent, right? Mastery comes from masters. It only comes from masters. And if you can never embrace the master that can give you the mastery, you're never going to become anything. And so they live on this potential.
Yeah.
And so we've got to figure out a way to enliven that. And the way that we get them out of this indifference, we get them out of this jealousy, we get them out of this hatred, and this potentiality, is we got to get them to move. We got to get them to move. The purpose of light is to invade the darkness. The purpose of a good man is to invade the evil that he sees around him. And so if we can find a worthy enemy of that person, that something that breaks that person's heart, we can begin to get them to move. And this is the great falsehood that the academics have brought to this generation, where they tell them to set a vision, cast a goal, build up the objectives and the tactics to be able to reach that goal, or to reach that vision of what they want to see happen. But they've never had a positive vision. So therefore, we've got to show them a negative vision of what they don't want in the world. They don't want the pain. They don't want the struggle. They don't want that manifest evil that they see all around them to occur. And so all of a sudden, if they can begin to feel just a little bit, they'll feel rising up within themselves this hatred for the evil that they see manifest around them, and the sex trafficking websites that don't respect minors, the fentanyl in the schools, the alcoholism that's devastated their family for 3 generations. They'll see this hatred rise up, and they'll begin to take action in small places. And this is how we can begin to lift these men out of this poverty of comfort.
Yeah, I love that. It reminds me too, and something you mentioned earlier, Rick, about the importance of quitting. A lot of people have heard the book Grit, right? Which is a good book. And I think there's a lot of good stuff in there, but there's also a good book called Quit. I don't know if you've read that one, but there's a good book called Quit. And she goes through the different reasons why it's also important to know when to quit. Because if you're staying too much with something and you're putting all your effort into it, to your point, it may not be your potential. It may not be your calling or something else, that people believe they have. I believe my calling is to let people prosper, which is why I do this podcast and got a PhD in economics and the stuff that I do. But it's important, because I know it's sometimes in my career where I felt stuck, where maybe I wasn't making as much money as I thought I should, or there was tension on public policy, or just different things. And it was tough for me to take that leap. And I think it's tough for a lot of men to stop what they're doing right now and quit and start something else that will hopefully bring them better on their trajectory. Do you feel that way too? Or what would you say about that?
Yeah, we've never met a man. You have never met a man who has worked hard enough on the right thing. None of us have. None of us have. Never met anyone that's worked hard enough on the right thing.
That's good.
And so trying to get that hard enough, that intensity, that competency right, and the directionality of the work, it's the object of the pursuit that matters, not so much the pursuit. And so on the right thing is the other portion of that direction. And so we've got to figure out a way to get those two things clicking. It's possible they may be in the right thing, but they're doing it for the wrong reasons, right? And maybe they should quit because they can't get their heart right. They can't get their mind right. They're doing it for themselves. They're doing it to be famous.
Yeah.
They're doing it for a number of other reasons. But they've got to realize they're focused on those two things. Let me give you those same two things in a different domain that helps make better sense for a lot of business people.
Sure.
Your competency and your integrity become your identity. Your competency plus your integrity become your identity over time. If you can't get both those things clicking, your identity is going to be something that you don't want it to be. And so those are the two main efforts. And so the competency has to do also with sort of this horizontal life that we live, how we deal with other people, the skills that we build, the knowledge we build, the relationships, the network, the Rolodex that we build, how we relate to our family, those sorts of things. But then the integrity is sort of the vertical nature of life, how we relate to morality, how we relate to God, how we relate to sin and to evil. It's that whole spectrum there that you want to get in place. And you don't want your identity to be affected because you've got one thing too wrong. In his book, Striking Thoughts, Bruce Lee said, low aim is the only sin.
That's good.
Sorry. Low aim is the only sin.
Yeah.
And I think in other places he calls it a crime. It's a crime to aim low.
Yeah.
And so those are the two things that we've got to get in place here: competency and integrity, if you want to have an identity worth having.
Yeah. No, I love it. And again, just for the audience, right? This is the book, 9 Steps to Build a Life of Meaning, How to Unlock Your Mind, Happiness, Power, and Your Enemy's Demise. When we're thinking about some of these things that are in here, I wonder on like personal responsibility. Just stepping back real quick, from my perspective, right? I'm a free market economist. I look at a lot of things and say, okay, what's going on with the economy? What's going on with people? Because really, economics is really about people. We forget that sometimes, but that's really what we're studying is the action and interaction within institutions to satisfy our desires given scarce resources. That's how I like to define economics. But it becomes more about the stock market and different things. But of course, people are behind each one of those transactions that take place. But one of the things that I'm seeing, Rick, over the years, and I wonder if this influences some of your work, is the larger dependency that we have on government, whether it be a number of welfare programs or whatever else it may be. I've often wondered, I've done some research in this space as well, but I've looked a lot at the crowding out effect that can have when you have bigger government crowding out what the family and the household is doing. And if you get a little bit more money, if you're on a welfare program, then you lose that. So it actually incentivizes people not to get married and for the dads to be distant. I wonder if some of those things influence what you see from your work as well, given the lack of responsibility and things of that nature, especially when it comes to men. Do you see that?
Yeah, so it's just a continuous of the 1960s out of UCLA, this thing that was the welfare queen around that time perspective with the racial inequity, and the calls for reparation that have happened over the last 10 years or so. That's slowly moved into this same removal of agency that started in the 1960s, and so that's what this is really all about. Is how do we get people to feel better about themselves by removing the agency? It's a power play. It's a political play, if you will. It's a fundraising play, if you will. If I can convince you that you're not responsible for your action, it's somebody else's fault, I can then motivate you, and I can get you interested enough that you'll not only vote, but you'll also maybe come out to picket, and you'll I can sell that on you for a long time. It's very difficult for people to forgive enemies. It's very difficult. And so that is one of those things that tends to be sort of a lifelong type of pursuit. And this is why this is happening yet again now, is we're 50, 60 years away from the 1960s. We're now on sort of our third go around on this. And it's happening to men. It's trying to demasculinize men. It's trying to tell men that it's the women's turn. Like, you need to be fair about this. And it is a complete and utter disregard for the difference between a man and a woman. And this is where the men have to stand back up. They want to be considered the nice man, but the nice man is very rarely the good man. In fact, he's almost always never the good man. You look in scripture, You look to see who the nice people were. The nice people were the Pharisees and Sadducees who crucified Christ.
Mm-hmm.
It was the nice men that crucified Christ. It was Christ that spoke against the nice men.
Yeah.
Who damned the nice men. And we forget that. We forget that later on, this Pauline doctrine says, hate what is evil, cling to what is good. He calls forth a passion to hate the evil. And there's a little semicolon in between that in my version. And I was told in my uneducated upbringing in public school that when I see a semicolon, it's sort of an equal sign. I'm thinking the equal sign there. And so I'm looking, hate what is evil, cling to what is good. That's the same thing. So the only way to get a bit of good is to hate the evil. You got to have a passion against the evil and be willing to fight it. But we were told to be good boys.
Yeah.
We were told to behave. We were told to calm down on the playground. And now we're seeing the repercussion from that through potentially, an entire lost generation, the birth rate decline, the decline of productivity. And a lot of men, including myself, are looking at this and trying to figure out how we're going to build a business over the next 20 years if we don't do something to revivify this entire generation of missing men without chests.
Wow. Yeah, that's powerful stuff, Rick. And it's unfortunate too, because from an economist perspective, right, I'm looking at this and men are dropping out of the workforce. The labor force participation rate's been going down for a while. Especially after COVID, a lot of people retired early and did other things and decided, you know what, I don't want to work right now. And so that's going to hurt the economy. But I think what it also hurts more of, and I try to look at the microeconomics more than the macro, is as a good Austrian economist would. But when you look at the micro level, it just seems like this breakdown of the family is really where we're struggling. Like we're pulling on that string. And it just continues to unravel over time. And that's why I think what's so important about your book, Rick, is making sure that we have a life of meaning. Because those 25 to 45, and I'm 43, so I'm right in that range, it can be a struggle. I mean, I haven't always done the right things here and there. In college, I liked to party a lot when I was at Texas Tech and, did a lot of crazy stuff back in the day. But, things start moving together and you start realizing, you know what, I better suit up. Now I've got kids that are looking at me. I've got other people that are doing these things. And I think one thing that really stuck out to me from the book is that you mentioned about why do men need masters and how to pick one wisely. Would you explain some of that? Because I think a lot of times us as men, we're like, man, we don't need masters. What's going on? And so that kind of stuck out to me from the book.
Yeah. If you don't pick a master, one will be thrust upon you. And here's the ironic thing. It won't be thrust upon you by someone else. You will do it to yourself. Dostoevsky, when you go back and I think it's Brothers Karamazov, there's a line in there that says that as soon as a man gets free, he is looking for the next person or the next thing to enslave himself. And here's what it looks like. And this is, again, my reading, I always assumed it was the type of thing where a man wanted to be in charge. I'm the alpha dog. I'm in charge. I'm the god of my life. And the more I studied, I realized that that would give men too much credit. That would give us too much credit. What really happens is we start thinking these things. We start saying that, if there was really a good God, this childhood cancer would not exist, or this pain would not exist. This flood would not have happened. We start to say that, a good God or, God should do this. We start inventing these realities and these gods that do these certain things in our own perspective. We begin to invent our own reality and therefore invent our own gods. And then we take this invented reality, how things should have happened, the evil that shouldn't exist in the world. And we begin to make this thing our God. We begin to try to conform our lives to this thing, much like the Egyptians, after they were slaughtered, their gold became the idol of the Israelites.
Yeah.
And they served that as their God when they had a real God right in front of them. And so we make this invented reality, this invented thing, our God, because we can blame this thing when things don't go right.
Yeah.
We can blame this, and we take away our agency the same way the 1960s, the agency was stripped away from people of color when they could blame the people of not color for their enslavement and their conditions and the conditions of their family. And so we see this continuation in there. And so if you do not pick a master, you will thrust one upon yourself, because that's the way that we were built. And like I said before, mastery only comes from masters. If you want to be good at anything, you've got to pick a master.
Yeah. Oh man, that's powerful stuff. And there's I just read the book Atomic Habits.
Oh yeah, James Clear, great book.
Yeah, man, it was awesome. I learned a lot from it, and it kind of brought me back to what you were saying a little bit earlier, along with what you just said, is that we need to build better systems. Because I think too often, and I know in my mind, I look at my goals and my business and other things that here's my goals. But I think it's really important to get those habits down, that system down, to get to reach those goals, or we won't ever reach those goals. For example, with your masters, if we don't find the right master or a master, my master is Jesus Christ. So ultimately, God, I'm a Christian. But I've also had a lot of, I don't know if you'd call this a master though or not, Rick, but like my mentors, that those are the people that I've turned to over time. Is that the same, or is that a little bit different?
Yeah, I think that's the same. I think the parts of your life that you put in subservience to someone that's greater, someone that not only has a higher integrity but a higher competency than you do, that's going to be the cap on both those things. And so in the business world, for instance, I want to have a mentor there, but I'm never going to become greater than mentor. The student never passes the teacher, and unless the teacher's replaced or the teacher is growing as well, or new teachers come into the fold. And so, yeah, I think there's a lot of rightness about that. But of course, I'm not going to take my financial advice from the same guy that's doing my marital counseling.
Yeah, right.
So I think the way that you want to think about it is sort of a hierarchy.
Okay.
If you can get sort of this hierarchy of masters, so you've got one main master that you're serving. In your case, it's Jesus Christ.
Yeah.
And if you can serve Jesus Christ, and you can make sure everyone that you're following in these various domains for the specific competency related skills and strategies, that they're somehow attached to Jesus Christ as their ultimate master, that power will then cascade down to you in these various domains of your life. But as soon as we detach one of those domains, as soon as we take on those business partners that are not from your faith system, we start to take on that spouse is not from your faith system. The spouse that doesn't want to go to the same places you want to go, that doesn't believe the same thing, the same value of the children that you value, you begin to disjoint your life. You begin to rip your life away. And then this is where this is where more invented realities and the confusion enter your life. And before you know it, you have a life that's a complete and utter mess. And so ideally, you've got some alignment that cascades down from a governing master.
Yeah, that makes sense. I know in the psychology literature, you hear a lot of talk about like a third, like you have a third, where you have a couple or spouses that are married, man and woman, and then sometimes there could be a third that hits on the outside if there's not alignment. To your point there, and so that's a great point. One thing I did want to ask you about is I also noted that you sacrifice 90% of your net worth, as you talk about in the book. What did you learn from that, and what can we learn from that kind of radical decision making? Because I think most of us would consider that pretty radical.
The assumption, the great lie that we tell ourselves is we need more comfort, not less. That we need less challenges, less hardships, not more.
Yeah.
There was an old radio talk show when I was in college. I think it was Ron D. Mercer that used to call people up and they'd pick a fight over the phone. And at the end, he'd say, "How big a boy are you? I'm going to come over there. I'm going to come over there and whoop your butt." But it was, how big a boy are you?
Yeah.
And sometimes you got to ask yourself that question: how big a boy are you? Are you just a fluke? Like, did you have this one off win because you bet the right person in an Albertsons?
Yeah.
Or can you do it again? And I'm the type of person that just wonders, can I do it again? Can I do it again? And it's not only a challenge, but it's also sort of an identity. You still have your mojo. And I think there's a lot of people that are probably watching, your show. They've had one or two wins, but they've had a lot of failures, and they assume that they need to de-risk their lives. When the truth is, sometimes you need to re-risk your lives.
Wow.
And so, like the situation I'm in right now.
Yeah.
I believe this so much. I'm married. I've got kids. I can't do this.
Yeah.
I can't do this. But one of my desires is just to give everything away. Just to give everything away and see if I can start with nothing, like not $1 in my pocket, not a phone, nothing. I just want to see if I can do it.
Yeah.
I don't know that. I don't think I've ever had an opportunity to do that.
Sure.
But I just wonder what that would happen, because everyone else that is successful, they tell you to take it easy. They tell you to not work too hard. Life is short. Enjoy it. And so I wonder what the, you know, I wonder what the inversion of that would look like.
Yeah.
And so this is mostly what you read about in that part of the book about me giving away 90% of my net worth.
Yeah.
And what came out of that, and the reasons why I did that. Sometimes you just need a shake up.
Yeah.
And the shake when you chase comfort, when you need to shake up, what you're doing is you're chasing more pain. And in the end, avoiding an ounce of pain, you'll drink a gallon of regret.
Wow. Yep. No, that's great. When you're looking at this and you're going through studying the book, and I don't know how long it took you to write the book, but it's a process. I'm going through that myself right now with the book. How do you like to balance some of these things? Like whenever for example, I wanted to go back to this that you had in your bio, is that you get up at 3:30 and you start your day. And I've read this about a lot of highly productive people, that they do start their days very early. I happen to be one is a night owl. So I'll stay up, to your point earlier about doing it when the kids are all asleep and the wife's asleep. They'll usually go to bed, and then I will work for 4 or 5 hours in the evening at night before I get a lot of hits on Twitter or X and emails and everything else, just because that's the time I've always started doing my work. Really back in college was mostly at nighttime. But I wonder how you kind of balance some of this in your own life. Speaking from personal experience, I'm sure that you've had some battles over time. How do you really balance all these things?
Yeah. So picking what you're not going to do is probably the most important thing.
Yeah.
In the morning, so this is what my morning looks like.
Okay.
The phone is always in the other room. It's in my closet, so it's 2 rooms away. I don't keep a charger by my bed, so I've got to go plug it in the other room. 2 significant advantages. This is a really great unlock for anyone who just needs to change. If you can't access your phone in the middle of the night, you're going to be bored the first 2 or 3 nights. You're going to be uncomfortable, but it'll revolutionize your sleep. It will revolutionize your sleep. The number 2, the alarm goes off in the other room. I have to stand up and I have to walk in another room. I installed a motion sensor light in there. The light comes on. So imagine this. It's early in the morning. The light's already on. You're standing up. You've already walked a few paces, and you got to shut the alarm off. And I have one rule on that is no snooze. I never snooze.
Okay.
No snooze. Alarm goes off, and I just automatically start putting clothes on. I don't even think about it. I don't let myself think about it. I got my clothes there set out, put it on.
Yeah.
6 seconds later, I'm fully dressed, and I'm like, I'm awake. I'm not going to be able to go to sleep for the next hour, even if I want to go climb back in bed.
Right.
So I might as well just go to the office. So I drive to the office, get there about 4:15, and I'm thinking it'd be great to have a latte right now. So I go get my latte. I go sit down on my favorite reading couch, and I crack open, one of several books. And so, generally for about 2 or 3 hours, I'm reading as old literature as I could possibly get, and I'm just spending time in silence. And I'm spending time, in the great literature of the world. And then I'm also working on some strategies, some written documents, but I try to stay off electronics until close to 8 o'clock. There's some significant advantages with that. Number 1, you do all the most important things, the important things that you never get around to because you're dealing with the urgent things.
Yeah.
Right? Think about the Eisenhower matrix.
Yeah.
You do all those things first. And so you've done all the important things. So that if you stop at 8 o'clock, if you don't turn the screen on, you've already done the most important thing for the day. And then number 2, there's no distractions. And then number 3, my kids are still asleep. They never know dads are gone. So I've worked an extra half a day. And then I'll sometimes do the same thing at night. And so think about the failures and think about the iterations we talked about before in the feedback loops. If you can put in 16-hour days for 20 years, you've got 40 years of experience. Right? Like, how valuable are you to the market with 40 years experience and you're 40 years old? Right. And you have the energy of a 40-year-old, not a 60-year-old.
Yeah.
And when you're 50, you've got, what is that? 60 years of experience. Yeah. Your competency is heightened. And so we begin to stack these benefits on one after the other. And by the way, you've only done the most important work first the entire time. So you have a strategic advantage across a multitude of domains. You're better learning. You're better conversationalist, and you're also someone that maybe has his heart and his head on right.
Yeah.
Because it's hard to have your head on right if your heart's wrong.
Yeah. Amen. Man, Rick, this has been an amazing conversation. As we're wrapping up here, what do you want to get across mostly on the 9 steps to a life of meaning? What was kind of the inspiration really behind it? And what do you hope to get out of it as you're doing all this and making, doing a lot of podcasts and everything else? What do you, Rick, hope to get out of it?
I want to put forth the idea, and this is more philosophical than it is a idea of motivation, that if a drop of hope exists anywhere, it threatens all threats everywhere. That if anyone out there is hopeless, they feel like they're in despair, they don't have any hope themselves, they don't know anyone that has hope, just the presence of someone in the world like me or you that has a bit of hope, and I don't think there's any denying that we have some hope, some optimism about the future, that my hope can then invade your present and your future, and it eliminates all threats. It's a highly fungible thing. Hope, to just use an economics word. Where it's a highly fungible thing. In fact, it's the most fungible things of all. So that I can say that a drop of hope threatens all threats. It's a unilateral threat that it poses. And so, if we can just build a little bit of hope, the top of the book above the title is Dr. Ben Carson, former Secretary of HUD, creator of the Opportunity Zone program, FYI.
Yeah.
And he calls the book Triumphantly Hopeful. And I'm gonna assume this is not a statement of ego, but I'm gonna assume that Dr. Carson is usually right.
Yes. Yeah. No, that's fantastic. Well, I really appreciate you being on the Let People Prosper show. Again, for the audience, it's 9 steps to build a life of meaning, how to unlock your mind, happiness, power, and your enemy's demise. I'm going to make sure to put this in the show notes page and everything. But Rick, thank you for writing this book. Thank you for being on the show, and God bless you and your family.
Vance, appreciate you. Thanks so much for hosting me.
Yes, thanks so much, Rick. And for the audience, I'll put all this in the show notes page and a lot more. Be sure to check that out. We need to learn more about what does it mean to have a life of meaning. And I think Rick really puts a lot of details to that we need to go and check out. Be sure you read this book. You can find more information about me at vanceginn.com and get the show notes and a lot more at vanceginn.substack.com. Well, I'll put all the show notes that we talked about here today. And until next time, God bless you and let people prosper.